Well, you're an expert at live shows, and this is my second, because just earlier I did the first one. This is my second one in 2 years.
Wow.
So I'll just say welcome to anyone who's joined us. And yeah, it's it feels a little bit weird. I think I was saying to you about doing this live show. I'm really excited about it, but I was so nervous because of the technical side of things. You can
Uh,
really just forget all of it, and it must be like second nature to you now.
Pretty much, pretty much. Whenever there's a new wrench thrown in, like there's an update or there's an API change, and so it won't go to some platform easily, and you have to reconnect. It's always like, wait, what were the ancient steps used by the prophets? And I have to like remember from 3 or 4 years ago what I did, or help other people that I work with.
Well,
And
yeah, you are so
yeah,
helpful for lives. So, welcome, and I'll just have Margaret introduce yourself.
yay! So I'm here with Katya. My name is Margaret Pinard. I am an author and bookseller and publisher, as you may have seen from the notes. I've got a YouTube channel that is creatively titled Margaret Pinard, where I talk about books that I read and sometimes books that I write, which are historical fiction and fantasy, for the main part. So that's what I love to talk about. And Katya's got great points about some intersections with those genres, but as well as various other eclectic works as well. So I love it.
Yeah, so I thought you're the fantastic person to invite to have a discussion today because of all of those overlaps. And I was, I was
Thank
thinking to
you.
myself, it would be really lovely to talk about different aspects of, books, because we just on Booktube we get the book, you review it. Yes, you do dive into different topics and stuff, but sometimes we don't think about how did we even get this book and what goes behind the whole marketing and all of that.
Uh-huh.
And I thought we can just have a comfortable conversation about yeah, it doesn't have to be specific, but yeah, I thought we have a nice conversation about it, and also about your journey as an author. So the first thing that I was wondering about is historical fiction. How did you get into it, and how did you get into the whole writing?
So I've loved reading since I was a kid, and that sort of translates into thinking about those topics in the writer's mind as well. So I proceeded down a life path that was sort of marked for me: successes, grades, college, education, nonprofits, world travel, lots of great things. But I eventually ended up in a place where I was like, this isn't really where I pictured myself. I wonder if there's another path. And so in about 2011, I started writing a book on the side, like a nano project, but it wasn't during November. It was evenings and weekends and sort of desultory practice. And then after a year, I looked at it and I read through it and I was like, this is the length of a book. Okay. And so I thought, all right, well, if I really like reading and I can write like this and I'm really enjoying that part, maybe I can make that into a career. And so maybe I could just go my own way instead of this whole working in an office thing, which doesn't seem to be doing it for me. And so I sort of made plans to dial back obligations and dial up risks and trying new things. And so that's how I started self-publishing, moved cross country, published my first book in 2013, which is Memories Hostage, historical mystery. And yeah, it's a historical mystery because historical fiction is my favorite genre to read because you both think you're learning something and you're immersed in a different world, so it's kind of like, you know, um, fantasy, and you're also being entertained. So you have those things coming together that really makes it feel like an escape and another world and just like opening up your mind. So that's what I love and I hope to bring across to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think historical fiction is getting it never goes away as, something that people enjoy. But more recently, I was thinking about the sort of like crossover into the inspiration for TV shows. So Shogun, historical
Ah,
fiction, that was
uh-huh.
out, and everyone loving, Edo
Yeah,
period Japan. And then
yeah,
more recently, Shard Lake. So that's going back to the 1600s. And I can just
yeah.
see, like a lot of people being inspired to pick up historical fiction and see what it has to offer, really. So, your time period, favorite time period for writing about?
Yes. Well, it's neither of those. So my interests have sort of ping-ponged around the 19th century, probably because I started loving Victorian literature in high school and like really liked that period of history where the romanticism was carrying the day, where it was falling back in love with nature after industrialization had started. So you've got this sort of war over those two forces, and you've got repression and societal expectations, and then you've got people going against those and finding themselves. And like those two are really exciting as well as themes. And so um, that's where almost all of my work has been placed. My Remnants trilogy starts in the 1820s, goes into the 1830s. The mysteries in the 1880s. The historical fantasy short stories are time travel, time slip, sort of like all over the place. And the one I'm working on now is 1830s as well. So they're all also set in the UK and Canada for the most part. So English speaking countries, but not mine. So yeah, I don't know. The other, yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section, and I'll put them up on screen and we can go over them. So one of the other things that I was thinking about when we were talking about how you got into writing, you said you had to sort of like embrace more taking risks because you're going out of that 9 to 5 setting, which most of us are used to, like we've all taken that, or most of us have taken that path you talked about. And then it's about that taking that risk. So how did you take that risk? Because financially, that's what people always worry about. Financially, can I take a hit?
Yes.
Hi. Hi,
So,
Epic. There we go.
hey. So, what I said was like dialing back obligations. So that means like I don't have subscriptions to anything and I'm moving in with a friend temporarily. And what I did, because I am not a fan of risk, I don't like, besides fiction, I don't like flying by the seat of my pants. And so when I moved cross country, I got a job that was a day job that was working at a bakery. So it was retail and it was one of those you can leave when you go home and it doesn't follow you home. So it was
Yeah.
part-time as well as being one of these not mental, take up all your brain jobs. And so I would work a shift and then I could take a shower, you know, the dough smell goes away, and then I'm free to do other things with my time. I feel like if you're working in an office job, often you're expected to do things outside of hours and you're sort of constantly balancing demands for that. And so when I chose a different kind of job that I felt more comfortable saying, oh, well, I'm not going to worry about things that aren't my responsibility, quiet quitting early on before that was a thing, if you want to call it that. That allowed me to have creative energy on the side that was like for me. And so I could dedicate that to the book.
You
And
know,
yeah,
Margaret, that's such a good point. I mean, I wish I had thought of quiet quitting like years back. How is this only a thing now? Like why did we take so long?
right, right. Like basically it's how did we let the corporate overlords put so many responsibilities on people without raising their wages for so long without complaining? Well, it's because we forgot we had a voice and we forgot we had power and can vote with our feet, etc. So, yay.
So Epic says, I loved Shogun. I read the book very long time ago. Watching the TV show has been great too. Yeah, so I definitely feel like, there's a lot of inspiration going on with TV more recently, going into historical fiction. And I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it's going
yeah.
to be just the 1500s. So I'm sure your
No,
time
no.
period is,
It's
I
coming
think
up.
out.
Well,
Yeah,
we've
it's coming
we've
up.
had Bridgerton. We did have a few. So there was Anne Lister's story, and I forget what the show was called, but that was the woman who basically assumed the clothes of a man and like
Oh,
had a lesbian
yes.
relationship,
Yeah.
and so people were talking about the costumes in that. Um, but yeah, so that was a big thing. And the Nevers, I think it was a little bit later. I didn't get a big splash, but that was a great sort of sci-fi historical crossover that was like so cool. Um, yeah, people are really creative. So I like that we're getting historicals as inspiration. I hope people will look up if there are books that they're based on, So try those
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. So,
Hey,
Mrs. P,
Mrs. Peacock,
hi, what genre do you write?
are you asking me or Katya?
Yeah, well, you're the author. I just keep writing drafts and hiding them away.
So I write historical fiction and fantasy, and so that's mainly what you'll find is historical fiction under my name.
Yeah. So, talking about, I like fantasy. I love historical fiction because, yeah, I'm into so many genres, but there's a crossover now that we're talking about TV and inspiration, and it's a flintlock adventure called something about Nellie Jackson, I think it is. But it's
Oh,
got some supernatural elements within a 1700s sort of England. It's
I don't
very
know
good.
that one. That's very cool. It sounds like it's like sitting right next to steampunk, but not there because it's 1700s. Like, oh, that's very intriguing.
Yeah, yeah, it's got the supernatural, it's got the fae in there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well then you could also bring in the Susanna uh what's that really long book? Jonathan Strange and Mr.
That,
Norrell.
do not mention that book to me. I have tried to read that blooming book, like, because everyone thought I'd like it because it is a crossover of historical fiction with the fantasy. And I have
Yeah.
tried to read it 4 times and I have DNF'd it at like the halfway
Watch the
mark. And
series. Watch the series, Katya.
I DNF'd the series after like
Oh
three episodes.
no! Oh no. Okay. That's a
So
bummer. I
no,
like
it
the series.
doesn't
Yeah.
quite work for me.
Okay.
But
I enjoyed the series. I didn't try. What was the one she came out with after with the fawn with the pan
Pi
flute?
Piranesi? Piranesi?
Piranesi. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 Yeah. So I haven't read that one yet. I do want to try, but I'm a bit afraid.
Susanna Clark. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry to
So
bring that up then.
it's no, don't worry. It's not that painful, but it was a lot of investment because it's like, I think the halfway mark
Yeah.
is like 500 pages or something.
Yeah.
Um, so
It's rough.
I wanted to know about research because with historical fiction, you can't just rely on your imagination. You have to get your historical facts correct. So what do you have to do for the research?
So you also wrote a question about advice about research, so I'm going to weave that in here.
Okay.
Um, but I would say when you're starting out, especially, and even now after like doing this 6 times, well, 7 if you count the one that's in the drawer, like, don't be afraid to start with Google. Like, it's not only for people who are fixing their dryer vents, like it's for people who want to learn stuff. It's a good place to start because it's like the whole catalog of human knowledge really is at your fingertips. So if you have a century to look in, or if you have an event you want to look into, I would say start Googling. It'll bring up um, blog posts, it'll bring up foundations who study that, it'll bring up research libraries, it'll bring up books. And then, what I use to describe this is like a Geiger counter. Like, if one thing really appeals to you and seems interesting, go more into that. And so you get drawn into more and more detail. And then you might get to like people who write a book about the thing and have studied it for their master's degree. Or then you get into a museum that's devoted to the whole subject and has like artifacts from the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, for example. So that's what I would say is whatever is your spark of interest, start general and then narrow down every time you feel that spark of joy, for example. Just like when you're decluttering, getting rid of things, follow your interest deeper until you get to things that are real, and then you can sort of frame a story or hang your story points on those real facts, because then at least for me, I feel more comfortable with, okay, I know this happened because of these things, and then that made people do this, and I feel like it fits in with the real history rather than being so much of whatever wish fulfillment or alternate history that I'm putting in there.
So what I'm curious about as well is in between your researching, do you stay away from books that are the same time period and like, or do you read more of them for further inspiration?
Um, when you're researching, I think it's useful to read books that are in the period you're researching, whether they're modern about that time or whether they're from that time. Like, I think a lot of times, if you're finding a good historical fiction author who writes about the same period, you can say, oh, okay, I recognize these things are true, and I don't know if that's true. Let me look at that, and maybe that yields some fresh detail or inspiration that you want to include. Um, and then, of course, sources from that time. I've read a couple of books now from, and I don't know what access other people have to this, so I apologize if this isn't accessible in other countries, but the interlibrary loan, where I can get books from the 1800s that are original journals from people, and it's a different library system. It's several states over, and they say, sure, you can borrow this, and they mail this, 200-year-old book through the mail. And then I have it for a month to look at. So I was just
Wow.
reading the biography of Archibald Allison, um, and that was, I think, put out in 1860 or 70, and just reading a lot of stuff that I'm not interested in including, but then like a few chapters where he's talking about being the sheriff of Lanarkshire and the strikes that were happening in Scotland and who was joining in and how he got around them and outsmarted them. And I was like, okay, well, this is definitely his view. So how would I make this more generalizable? That stuff is really fun. So the point at which I stop reading those is when I'm writing. So if I'm drafting, I think that's where people can more get into trouble with like letting their voice be influenced by the other voices they're listening to or reading. If you're an audiobook person, you're listening to them. But yeah, that's what I would say. Some people wouldn't be affected, but I think I am. And so usually I'll just concentrate on writing and then listen to something completely different, like a romance or nonfiction. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
But that sounds amazing about the library because I don't think that's a thing here in the UK.
No?
We've got an inter sort of like county. So I'm
Uh-huh.
in one city and I can get anything within this county, but I can't really get anything the next county over. So yeah.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. I yeah, I don't know, because I've seen libraries in Canada that you can access books from, and I'm kind of like, maybe they don't send it in the mail. Maybe it's only like if it's a journal, they can, if you have membership, your library can get
Yeah.
you like a digital copy of it. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Come
cool.
come visit in the US if you want to come see if there's a specific book.
I haven't been in ages. I think it was 2008 I went to California for a month, stayed with a
Ooh,
cousin. Yeah.
nice.
It's a long time ago.
Well, that's where I'm from, so I'm biased. That's the best state.
So, one of the other things that I was thinking about, you've got so many different hats within uh, this. Oh, what do I want to say within this field, really?
Mm,
Because you're talking about, you're on Booktube, you're on Authortube, and you do the book selling. So I wanted to sort of tap into the whole idea of, so you got your research done, you have to do all of the editing, and then you get your product. What do you do next with your whole marketing, book selling? What
you skipped the
happens?
drafting phase. I'll
Ah,
just point
see,
that out.
look at that. Yeah, look at that. There's so many different steps. So you writing,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So I would say research, drafting, editing, formatting, and then publishing, which is a whole thing. It's like it's yeah. Um, what would I say about what having to manage all those things, or what's my
Yeah,
favorite
do you
part,
get
or
yeah, about having to manage them, and do you also like get other people involved in the process, or are you someone who does it all?
I see. Okay, so I would say, like, to compare, to give people an idea of what it is like as an alternative, traditional publishing. So this is what I hear from my friends who are traditionally published. Usually when they are going on tour for a new book coming out, they have just submitted their next book's draft. And so they are in a cycle which I thought I would be able to do when I started my publishing as an indie publisher, which was you're sort of doing a constant three ball juggle, right? And so when you let's see, publish book one, that means that the next thing to do is um, draft book two, market book one, publish book two, edit, like you have to sort of time when you're able to do all these things. And I can't pull it out of my head right now. It's on like a piece of graph paper, but you have to figure out how much time it takes you to do each one and which ones you can do together. Sometimes you can't focus on marketing when you're drafting something different because it means you're juggling two stories. That's going to be personal. But that's the same whether you're trad pub or indie pub, I think, depending on
So,
deadlines.
Margaret, this makes so much sense. I took part recently in something by Tandem Collective, who promote books.
Uh-huh.
And I think most of them are traditionally published. So the publisher will, give them a set number of books to give to reviewers for an honest
Mhm.
review. But as part of that, it's a read along and they do all sorts of things. And that really helps with the marketing because you've got all
Yeah.
these people who are on like Instagram or Booktube or whatever reading the book and then they talk about it. And so that really helps with the promotion of it.
Yeah.
But the more recent one that I read, which I'll very briefly mention. It is historical fiction, but a dual timeline, and it's set
Okay.
in India and California. So
Okay.
it's called Dry Spells, and I thought it was interesting that they talked about this book has just come out. We get to read it, and then they were talking about her second book. So it was a dual book deal. And so the minute you said that, I was like, wow. So we sort of like sit here thinking, it's you put all of this work into one book, and then that's going to be where you put all your effort, but you already have to immediately
Yeah.
the expectation is that you've got something else in the pipeline. That is interesting.
Right. Right. Because for trad pub at least, I think once you finish a draft and you have an agent, the agent shops it around to a publishing house. That can take months. So you want another project to work on. So you're going to draft your next book. When it gets to a publishing house and you have a contract, then they're editing it. So then you're involved because you have to edit and make changes with them. So maybe you've drafted your second book and now you're in editing with them. And then they finish the edits. They're going to do the cover and the format and the marketing meetings and all that. So you're not involved really. And so then you can go back to editing yourself, your draft of your second book. So it's constant back and forth. When you're an indie pub and you're doing all those steps yourself, you're not waiting for someone else to do something usually until you choose to hire a contractor for one of those services. So Um, I have used developmental editors before. I have used copy editors before. I definitely use a professional cover designer because that is not me. But the one thing I learned how to do that was excruciatingly painful is formatting, interior formatting. And so I still do that myself to save a bit of money. Um, but yeah, so I time those steps so that I'm doing them all and try to, coordinate the one piece that's happening outside, coming back, happening outside, coming back. So I don't get to do those leapfrog things because it's me doing every task
Yeah,
usually.
yeah,
But
doing it
yeah, that's
all.
what you juggle.
So this is a really interesting process to learn about juggling drafting, editing, publishing, marketing, and so on. Absolutely. And so when we're talking about having one book being marketed, and then you're already trying to get interest for your second book, it's like, oh, and so I hope you love this book, and if you do, there's already this book on its way
Yeah,
soon.
yeah.
um
So
but you
just
said
think.
some
Go ahead. Yeah, I'll
You
remember
said
mine.
something interesting, because you talked about when you've worked with two different types of editors. So what did you say? You said developmental editor and
Copy editing. So
copy editing. Can you
there's
describe the two?
yeah, there's much more, there are more categories, subcategories and whatnot, but it sort of goes, developmental editing is taking a overall look and seeing if there is enough tension, if there is enough, character growth, if there is, enough conflict to sort of make the story go and feel supported and feel natural by the end. And so when you get that back, it's basically like, okay, think about these characters at the beginning. Could you make them hate each other more? Or think about this point at the climax. It doesn't feel totally supported. Can you make this stake higher, or make that person feel more alone so that it's more exciting, something like this. So that's sort of a big thing. And you may have to change a whole through line. So that's sort of the bigger picture that you want to do early on.
Okay.
When you get more detail, you get into copy editing, which is like grammar, punctuation. You get into line editing, which is like individual word choice. You can also get into historical accuracy. If you have someone who is specializing in that time period, they can go through with you to say, wait, they didn't have telegraph poles by that time. You're out on a limb, and then you go back to developmental phases. So, and then at the end, the last one should be proofreading, which is a type of editing as well. And so that's like making sure the spaces and the umlauts and whatever else you've
Everything.
put in. Yeah.
So what type of editing is best for a first-time author?
Well, it depends on where you think you need the help, right? So if your story feels very exciting when you read it, and it feels like it goes and it's a page turner, I would say you have a good base. And what I would probably recommend for a first-time author is having beta readers. So that's what I did for the first book, is that
Yeah.
before you pay someone like hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars to look at your work, maybe you need some distance and some more objective feedback, and you can hand it to 4 or 5 friends that are, readers and can tell you if they agree, or if it just, doesn't have what it takes to feel like an actual novel, a real story. And then if you have differing opinions, you can sort of, I don't know, focus group. But yeah, beta readers are helpful when, they're your friends and they are familiar with the genre and can tell you, well, I usually read spicier romance books, but this had a good story and, it was totally good. But I lean more spicy romance. Or someone could say for a sci-fi, like, I think you need to do more work on the magic system, or the fantasy, I guess, on
Yeah.
the magic system, because this doesn't make sense and it's contradicting here. And so that's sort of a big picture thing you want to get early on. So maybe a first step.
Yeah, that makes sense. So although I've only got drafts, and many of them, I have got beta readers in the writing group that I'm in. And absolutely what you said is
Yeah.
what happens. You get all of these really good points, and you do get differing opinions. Like there will be someone who would love loads of spiciness in the book, and other
Right.
people going, what, I only want the plot, I don't want any spice. You can
Yeah.
hint at a romance, but keep it out of there, sort of thing. So
Right.
yeah, it's interesting.
So that's where it's important to beforehand communicate clearly what you're asking for, because they're doing you a favor by reading the book and giving you feedback, but you also want to set them up for, I don't need like clarifications on commas at this point. I want the whole story, like impressions, characters you like and don't like, scenes you like and don't like, but please don't tell me I didn't capitalize the beginning of the sentence on page 92. Like, I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
So
So Andrew's in my writing group, Rabbit Pirate,
Oh,
and
hello.
he's no spice, please. And if Jackie were here, she'd be saying, yes, spice is great. So
Epic
yeah.
Tale says, yes, spice for me. Spice for me too. I'm listening to a really good one right now. Yeah.
I don't think I can write spice anyway, so I think Andrew is safe.
It is difficult. It is difficult.
Do you write spice, or do you, because I read the first of your trilogy that has the family that go from the Scottish, because there's land clearings, and they go on to emigrate to Canada because it feels like they have, that's it, the keening, because they have no other options. And it really, really is what happened. That's the beauty of historical fiction. This is based on real things that happen and explains the emigration from Scotland to the, where was it in Canada?
Nova Scotia, very cleverly
Yeah,
named New
yeah,
Scotland.
yeah. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so what was the question before all that? It was I got lost when I went to find my book.
I'll let you think. I'll just
Spicy
pop this.
scenes.
Yeah, a bit of
Yeah,
spice,
spicy
please, from
scenes.
Julia.
So what I would say is that when I started out with the keening, this was my third book, and I did not put spice in this. This is dramatic historical saga kind of feeling, family drama, hardship, emigration, issues of prejudice and social change. And then when I went into the second book, it was the older kids, and so they were negotiating marriage and courtship and trying to get into schools, and so that was a different type of like innocence and coming of age. So it wasn't really spicy either. But then the third one, it's the younger kids having grown up and they're married. So there are scenes not like spicy in terms of like tantalizing, but like explaining how a marriage works and how feelings change and feelings are hurt and like there's disappointments and like you just
Yeah,
want to be real about things, and so then some references did make it in, but it's not definitely not like a
it's not
spicy romance.
Bridgerton.
No, 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 no
uh,
eggplant emojis.
so we do have Julia's also in my writing group, and yeah, she's happy to have a little bit. So you can see that there really are different tastes when you're writing specific things. So yeah.
Hmm.
But beta
Yeah,
readers are really useful because they give you so many different perspectives, like stuff that you don't think about.
right.
Uh, Hundreds of romance novels in high school has conditioned me for spice.
You're ready. I love it.
It's like, you've been doing your research, which we just talked about.
Yes, yes. Industry research. You got to read what you write. I think that's one of the most important things is if you want to write a story in a specific genre, the voice is yours to decide, but that is closely related to how you're going to explain or position or sell the book. So, if you're going to be a historical fiction writer, like this is one of the things that came up recently. I was sort of hesitating about what voice do I want to use for my current work. Do I want it to be earnest, which is kind of how I started this one out? Do I want it to be a little bit more jaded? Do I want it to be, like more feisty vibe? Like there's different characters who speak to you in your story, and then you gotta sort of flesh that out and be consistent. And so I hadn't landed on the right voice yet. So yeah, second draft is coming up, and that's what we're going to be doing.
So you actually just touched on something because you talked about the different stages, and then you said as you come up to selling, and so I wanted to know about that part of it. Like how do you do the whole marketing and selling, and then going into like distribution as well? All the hard stuff.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. So how? So one of the pieces of advice for writers is often that you want to market your book before it's ready because you're preparing the way, right? You want to have a newsletter before you have a product to sell, and this is like looking at it from very business minded position, so that when it's ready to release into the wild, like you have an audience waiting to pick it up and run with it. And that's all very well, but when you're doing everything for the first time, you can't be in all those hats at the same time. And so until you've sort of experimented and know what you want to do, that can be hard. Um, I would say when I first started out, I did the research as I went. So it was quite a long run up period for the writing, for the editing, for the formatting, as I told you, excruciatingly painful. Um, for the publishing was actually the quickest because at that point in time, it was only Amazon Kindle, but now we've got more options. So now we've got more places. The distribution was something that came about midway because as an indie author, your options have ballooned in the past year or two. And so you've got lots of decisions to make. So depending on if you're digital or physical or audio, you've got different decisions and some overlap. So it can be confusing. And there is no infographic that I've seen that like completely portrays this easily digestibly. But I would say you've got to be on Amazon. I hate them, but I have got to be there because that's where people look for books or everything really. I also use Ingram, which is a distributor wholesale for physical books. Whether you have a paperback or a hardcover, it will go through Ingram and be distributed to um, anywhere in North America and to partners in other places of the world. And so when you go through that process, just like with Amazon, there's a place where you go through and say, here's the price for Zambia, for Madagascar, for India. Like you can set the price for all these different markets. And I'm sure some aren't there, but like the majority of them are. And distribution and selling. So that's really one of the final points is those detailed decisions. And I am not a lover of decision points. So while you may feel energized by deciding the price points or where you're going to be or, you know, how many places you're going to sell, it's kind of like decision fatigue. For me, it comes very
Yeah.
early. And so I have to like budget more time for that because every time I have to confront do I do this or this? The emotional weight of having to live with a decision for me sometimes makes it hard and like, I don't know, I feel wiped out after.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can relate to that. I think
Yeah.
I would be in that position. I've more recently heard people who like indie authors talking about Shopify on their own websites, like they're trying to do Shopify on their own sites. Is that something that's really more popular or getting more popular?
Yes. So I will just say, because I love them, Smashwords was a digital purveyor in between that I used. They have since been bought by Draft Digital, and so they will both do digital and physical. So that is another distribution point. Um, I don't think they're as well known for like selling. So those are more like distribution to other platforms. But yes, so direct sales is on my list. You had a question about what would you tell a new author, and I thought if I had to do this over again, I would definitely prioritize that. Like make your website very easily navigable, put your sales proposition on every page in the same place so people know where to go, and use a direct sales processor so they can take credit cards, they can fulfill orders. So Shopify is one. I think PayHip is probably the most popular for indie authors.
Okay.
Um, I use another plugin that I can't remember the name of right now with my WordPress site, but it has issues. So it's one of those things that like I've decided I need to do it, but I don't have the technical know-how. So it's just
So
sitting there.
that was gonna be my next question, like, have you been doing it all yourself, or is it something where you kind of think, "Gosh, you need someone, who can just, set it up for you?"
Well, they tell you that, you know, if you have trouble getting something done, hiring it out could be like the way to get it done. And, you know, is it worth the money for you? And for me, I've done this twice, three times now. I go through Upwork to find a contractor. It's very hard because every website developer, designer wants to just design from new. And I'm like, I don't want to pay for
Mm,
a $3,000 whole new website.
yeah.
I want to work with what I have, which is cute, and it's like on brand. I just want you to fix the parts that don't work.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
and
been very hard.
That's really interesting because I was wondering to myself more recently, Ilona Andrews, the
Yes.
husband-wife duo, they
Oh,
do
okay.
loads of indie publishing, and they've got a traditional publisher as well. But if it gets turned down by their usual publisher, they go ahead and they indie publish, and they do a lot of their marketing and everything. But
Wow.
more recently, what I saw on their newsletter is they said, "Oh, you'll see the revamp of our website, and we got this, this company to do it." And I was thinking, wow, the last site was okay. I wonder why they did that. Like because it's totally revamped. But then, as I was reading through it, it talked about how they took it to the bare bones and built it back up. And you're saying this, and I was thinking, well, yeah. So obviously, that is a preference for anyone taking it on. They want to start from scratch again.
Right, right. I'm sure like if I use the metaphor of a contractor doing a house, they want to do everything their own way so they know it's solid rather than having to fix someone else's mistakes. Which
Yeah.
fair enough, fair enough. But yeah, yep.
So Andrew says, I find the marketing side of things much harder than writing the book in the first place.
It's definitely a different skill set.
And I just go back because I skipped a couple of comments. I've also heard that reading different genres helps you make your writing in the genre you write richer. For instance, Game of Thrones is fantasy, but the drama aspect of it is a huge part. And that's
Hmm.
sort of echoed by Andrew as well. Do you feel that with writing historical fiction that you get some ideas from other genres?
That's a very interesting question.
Do you
Um,
find like contemporary views sort of like edging into the historical fiction
so
characters
that's something that's
sometimes?
usually frowned upon. Usually that's like you yeah, usually historical fiction readers don't want that because it feels cheap. It feels like you're just grabbing some of this over here and stuffing it in this different setting instead of trying to imbue the character with a natural progression of change of perspective, if that's where you want to arrive at the end. Um, so I would say that's not what I would hope for, but I think if you think about okay, so I just read a Zadie Smith book called The Fraud. Have you read Zadie Smith?
I've read her, yeah, White Teeth,
Okay.
and some of her essays.
Okay. So I think The Fraud was her first historical fiction, and I think she writes very differently in each of her works, and so that's one of her trademarks. But one of her like I won't say signature because I can't tell from the other books, but one of the things I really appreciated from The Fraud was these sort of sneaky humor asides that the reader would get, or like someone who knew the period would get. And I thought, that's interesting. I wonder if I can work that into mine. Or like the way she structured things very short, um, into short chapters and very interior focused was interesting and less dialogue. I think some people might like that less, but I really liked how she broke it up. So I think if you're, I mean, that is historical fiction, so that doesn't answer your question. So let me let me
No,
pan
that's
out.
okay because what you're highlighting there is someone who's sort of like writing in the historical fiction genre, but is doing something that you don't find a lot of authors doing, which is also really interesting. I like when that happens, and so yeah, I was going to say I watched the Booksellers Awards, not Booksellers, British. It's called the Nibbies Awards, and it's
Okay,
British Book Awards on. Gosh, I
I
think
don't
it was the weekend,
know about this.
but I'm currently reading Fourth Wing for research purposes, and I know it gets
No
such bad
shade. I heard
press.
it's good.
Such bad press. And it's like, oh, only people who are on Book Talk love it, blah blah blah. And I'm reading it, and I can see, why it's working. It's not my favorite book. It's not as
Right.
bad as I thought. It's sort of like this middling.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was interesting is it won an award, and when they mentioned the books they said and the award goes to this book because it's so groundbreaking, and I thought, oh, so that's not going to be Fourth Wing, and then they said Fourth Wing, and then I was like, hang on, why is it groundbreaking?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
And then I could think of a couple of things. So Andrew saying, authoring groundbreaking. And I
Yeah.
think it's because it had a lot of disability rep, which was
Mm,
good because a lot of times you find with fantasies like these dragon fantasies and the action and everything that you don't have the disability rep. So
right.
that way. But then I was trying to think of I'm only halfway through the book, so maybe there's
Yeah.
something more groundbreaking coming as well.
I don't know,
But
halfway.
it's a positive. It is a positive.
Yeah.
So I suppose it was a publisher acknowledging that they don't see it happening as often in a particular genre, perhaps. That's my
Yeah.
interpretation of it.
Sounds plausible. Yeah. Yeah. No, like another example. So if I was to say, I mean, I don't read a lot of epistolary books, but um, I really appreciated This Is How You Lose the Time War. Did you read that one?
It's on my TBR. It's
Okay,
on my
so it's
TBR. It's like got red and blue and something.
yeah, it's very short and it's basically messages to each other, to and from two narrators. And it's very interesting that the language they're using towards each other, they're unknown, they're learning about each other, and they're speaking in code. And it's kind of like you're playing with who the audience is, like how many layers of the audience there are. And that's science fiction. So I
Oh,
like
oh, I think I remember something. Is it they're like paralleled worlds and they're aware of each other, but they're not allowed to acknowledge the other world? Is that
they're
something
fighting on other sides. They're fighting
Ah,
on the opposite sides of a war for who controls the timeline, basically what I remember.
okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so I do try to read widely. The only stuff I won't read is like horror that I can't handle. Um and so yeah, if I read something like that and it's making me think, like that's processing and it may filter into what I'm working on, but probably not the first draft level. Probably when I'm like chewing it over during my self edits. Yeah.
Yep. So
How shallow for doing. Oh,
so I mean the the interesting thing that is the things that hit me about reading this for research was as I was reading, I was going, "Oh, this doesn't feel like it's as far back in time as the world building was really different." I mean, there's
mm,
and when we talk about the shallow bit, there's fairly early on the main character's talking quite a bit about her hair and getting her hair braided by her sister, and they're talking about it, and then she ends up changing out of her scribe robes and into a tight fitting leather outfit, and then she's like, I look badass. And so I was like, no, where is this going? And
yeah, yeah.
and like getting to meet these people at the academy, the observations are like, ooh, she looks so cool, she's got pink hair. And so there's certain things that sort of like jump out at you. But the funny thing is, in between those things where I'm kind of going, the writing isn't bad. And
Yeah.
she's got this really clever way of ending on a cliffhanger for most of
The
the chapters.
chapters. Oh,
Admittedly, there's a lot of death, so at some point I became sort of like blasé about a character dying.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's worth a read for research.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was really helpful, especially just thinking about all of the different ways or the different options that are available now when you're indie publishing. Like going back to the fact that you can integrate all of these tools in your website and stuff.
Mm,
But for me, it was interesting with Ilona Andrews, sort of, because you can buy books from them as well, and the fact that they built it up from the ground again as well. Yeah.
yeah, I
So
would always advocate that people provide as many options as they can handle. You want to make sure they all work, and then you want to make as many options as possible because that's just making it more accessible to more people, and your numbers can only go up. Doesn't mean that they will go up, but your sales can only go up the more options you offer. Um, I do not have audiobooks, for example, because that's a committing to a significant investment of money to produce them unless you go AI. And I don't want to do that because I think that's taking the jobs out of audiobook narrators and they have a real craft. So yes, I would say get your book out as many ways as possible as you can handle. It won't drive you nuts. And direct sales is really sort of dovetailing with the original pro of going indie, which is that you don't have to wait for validation. You get to control all those decisions if you want to make them about the cover and the formatting and the font and when you're going to go and what formats you're going to provide, all those things. And so if you're also deciding to offer it direct sales, like what I would tell a first time author is that if I was doing this again, I would have it on my website cheaper than anywhere else because I'm going to make the most amount of profit selling it direct and having someone else fulfill it. And then make that the most appealing option by including a custom signature message or a bookmark or like custom art or a sticker or something that's not going to break the bank, but that, is just like a small extra step that means you've got a fan. You've got like someone who took a little time to send you the book with a nice little aside, So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's really helpful because I was going to ask you pros and cons. So that's really, really good. One of the things that I was thinking about as well that you mentioned about the audiobooks being expensive, and then it suddenly occurred to me that Travis Baldree, who's had so much success with cozy fantasy, which is
He's a
something that
narrator, yeah.
yeah, so I was like, oh, I can think of someone who, wrote their first book and was indie published and they did an audiobook. And then I was like, but he narrated it himself and he isn't a
Professional.
narrator.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
makes sense that he was able to do that. I mean, he didn't charge himself to narrate the book. So yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. Probably already has like a great home studio and everything. But he also put up a whole post about how he did it, right?
Ooh,
I think it was him. Because there's a gal I follow on TikTok and she followed his steps exactly, I think. Um,
okay. So that's interesting.
so
It's
yeah,
worth
so
a look.
I have that open to go through, but I was gonna compare. But yeah, he he's did such a good job. I haven't read the first one, but I read Bookshops and Bone Dust on
Oh,
audio.
that is so funny.
And
Andrew did the
yeah,
same thing. He read the prequel
yeah,
first, which is,
yeah,
like chronologically, that's great. But I was like, oh, but Legends and Lattes is the one that came out first. But yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah,
you're gonna enjoy that because
yeah.
uh, I thought that everyone's gonna go, I love Legends and Lattes more, but I still like Books and Bone Dust or Bookshops and Bone Dust. But I've seen some people who prefer the prequel, the Bookshops and
Interesting.
Bone Dust. So yeah,
Yeah,
be interesting to see what you think of Legends and Lattes.
yeah.
So the other thing that I was wondering about is I'm having a quick look through those questions I sent
We
you
have a
because I
question we
can't
can answer in a
remember
little bit.
anything. It's
Yeah.
it's a it's about the booksellers influencing like work if you work with booksellers or your work in book selling, does that actually help you with identifying trends in historical fiction and then influence you, or do you just stick with your passion, go, you know what, this is what I'm passionate about and this is what I'll write about?
So when you said trends, I thought about it and thought about it. And I thought, okay, so what I've noticed are like cover um trend changes a little bit. So like the ubiquitous, I think I have it on, let's see. Is it on this one? Nope. On this one? Nope. Okay, they're proving me wrong. Well, the typical historical fiction cover is a woman and, costumes of a different era. And you're either seeing her like without her eyes down or from the back and a small figure. And I didn't want to do that because I felt it was depersonalizing and it was like putting history in a box. And so I went with landscape. Like I tried to make it a little more abstract and dramatic. Um, but I did change the cover recently and get a new one that was according to those. But I really didn't launch it in the way that would have made a big splash. So cover changes are one thing, and they tell you to, refresh them every so often. And that will help them find a new audience, because then like whoever's eye it caught the first time, it'll be a different sort of person for the next time and might be the same reader that you're looking for or a similar reader. So that was one. In terms of content, like you can talk about eras that are trending, but like really every era is out there. So there's always going to be World War II, right? That's like a
Oh
big,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
a surfeit, yeah. But I find my list of 1906 earthquake books keeps growing. Like it's small, and then I keep finding more and more. And actually, I just got a list of audiobook reviews that included a new book called Clear that is about the clearances in 1840. So like the last round in a different part of Scotland. And I thought, someone else is still writing about this. It's kind of
yeah.
fun. Um, but what was the other trend that I thought of? Did I write it down? Mirror trends. Oh, okay. So this is a cool one I thought that seemed new was having co-writers. So one of the big dilemmas in historical fiction is that you don't want to write just white waspy history, right? And so you want to include diverse voices. You want to get the stories of marginalized populations in history because that'll give you a better viewpoint on conflicts, on technological change, on power struggles, all these things that make history interesting. And the issue with that is if you're a white writer, how do you assume the voice of someone whose experiences you don't have and you can't know? And so one of the cool things I've seen in a few different combinations is people doing co-writing. And the first one I saw was the personal librarian. I don't know if you heard of that one. It's someone who was the personal librarian for JP Morgan in New York City in early 20th century. And she passed as a white person, but she was actually a woman of color. And she had to pretend and, sort of divide her life up. And it brought up all these issues. It was a really intense sort of personal journey. And that was transformed into historical fiction. It was written by a big historical fiction writer, Marie Benedict, with Victoria Christopher Murray, who is a Black woman writing. I think she normally does more children's books, but it's children's history. So it's approaching history and sort of adapting it for a different audience. And so they wrote this one together so that there was an understanding that it wasn't a surface level sort of research. It was someone who was part of the population contributing to the book and, a team effort of bringing that voice to the fore. And so that's a new trend that I really kind of like. And in fact,
Yeah.
I just started this book as a buddy read. It's The Phoenix Crown by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. And so I've read Kate Quinn before and I've read Janie Chang before. So now I get to read a book that they're co-writing together. And it's about the 1906 earthquake, and it's got a couple different points of view. One being a young Chinese woman right before the earthquake in Chinatown. So like that is
Yeah.
giving you more assurance that they're going to cover their bases and be representative, which is great. So I like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And not one that I really clocked, but the moment that you picked up that book, I was like, oh, I added that to my TBR because I kept seeing, like pop up everywhere.
It's
And I
so
haven't even read
good.
the blurb. So yeah. I was just
I
like,
am,
it's everywhere. Let me just add it to this list.
yeah, I'm not very far in, but it's really good so far. Yeah.
So Andrew's actually touching on one of the questions that we haven't covered yet, which and the perfect timing. You may have covered this before, but how did you go about to find an audience for your books? So I think we had a few questions around finding your audience, reader. How do you tie into or figure out reader preference and all of that?
Yeah, so I did not use book selling and like my liaising with the reading public to do this because my books were already like in process and out there. I feel like the muse and the inspiration has to come from sort of the world within. And yeah, I don't think I at least can connect that to like a market thing. I can't go, oh, the market research says books about 1930s Louisiana are in. Let me do some research on that and whip something out for the market in 6 months. Like I can't make myself care about it enough to write
Yeah.
a story that's long enough and focus on the research long enough. So that just doesn't work for me. But what does work in terms of cultivating an audience is finding the places where people are interested in the same things. They just don't have the same skill set. So they're reading about it, and they like the clearances as a topic because they have family who went through the same experience, or they're museum curators and they love listening to just like the history of other people, and what they took with them, and like the material history. Or I don't know, there are people who live in Scotland and they don't know where they just moved to, and they're looking for history about that land and that people, that sort of thing. So I'm sort of thinking about connections for the audience that way. And then, you can go to like keyword research and SEO stuff, which I haven't done, but I would recommend doing if you wanted to find more of those micro audiences. Um, and then this gets into your platform question. In terms of building an audience for my books, I would say the research I did for the marketing, not for the book, but for the marketing, because that was a whole other thing, um, involved going through my contacts and being like, where do I already have networks pre-made? So that was alumni networks and hometown networks and family networks. And since I've been in Portland, I've studied the Gaelic language, so there's people there who would be interested. And I did like a sort of witchy spiritual circle, and like they might be interested in there. Um, and then later, after the books were out, and I was like pivoting because I'm not an Instagram person, I'm not a Facebook person. I am Twitter, but Twitter's dying, so they just switched over to X. Did you see this? No. So I was like, well, what can I do? What do I really feel like myself doing? And it was video. So I was like, all right, let's do this YouTube thing. Let's get into that when the pandemic hit. So summer of 2020. And so this is where I try to like interest people in historical fiction, some of the same things that I love reading about and nerding out over. So yeah.
So this is an interesting thing because we all have our preferences for platforms. I'm with you. I just found Twitter really difficult because every time I was on there seemed to be something blowing up, and it was like, how is this even productive? And what's the use in all of this negativity? So I sort of came off
Uh,
there. But when I originally joined, I got a lot of news about authors and what they're doing and that sort of thing. And I sort of like lost the way amidst all of the sort of like the tea, the gossip, and like highlighting somebody said something wrong, and everyone jumping
right,
on
right.
that. But I was just on a previous conversation with Epic Tales channel,
Uh-huh.
and he highlighted that the way that he's using Twitter is still really useful in terms of, like
Mm,
knowing what's happening with the authors and stuff. And more recently, I saw quite a few booktubers sort of like leaving Instagram. So,
mm,
like Scott from Gunpowder Fiction Plot said goodbye
yeah.
to Instagram. And I
I
think
didn't see that. Okay.
yeah, yeah, and I'm trying to think. I think it was Jack from Spread Book Joy also
Yes,
said,
I
"Yeah,
did see hers.
I'm
Yeah.
yeah." So she said, good. And I was like, "Okay, so there's a few people who've left Instagram, and I'm actually just really getting into it now, and finding it really useful." So that's it's
Oh,
interesting,
you
isn't it?
gods. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I feel like whenever I try to intentionally schedule content for Instagram that would be rotation of certain topics and like keeping the brand colors and be regular and consistent, like it does not pay off. And so I just get disheartened. And so why am I putting so much time and effort into this when I can just really use it as a place to message friends who are on any other platform, and put up a picture every now and then that's like, hey, here's my really good food that I made. I'd rather just
Yeah.
keep it as that.
So
Here's my
talking about
really cute
different
cat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but talking about different platforms, we actually talked about this as well. So, have you got a Discord? I know that some people are
not
finding
personally.
Discord. Okay. And
Yeah.
now Patreon. Are you finding Patreon useful as an author, but you're using it more as BookTube? Would you use it as, an author?
I'm using it as an author, actually. because none of the benefits are booktube related. So I
Okay.
include it like I would on my website and in my email signature and sort of like part of the author brand, right? So the first one you said, Discord, I'm on it and I'm in many overlapping servers for like the Authortube Writing Conference and other channels work and stuff like that. But I don't have my own. I'm not, it's not a paid thing and I don't have time to do another gardening project, which is basically what it is, right? It's just like Instagram. It's like gardening. You've got to prune, you've got to fertilize, like you have to focus on it. And so Patreon, what I offer is postcards. So I send postcards to folks, and it's usually like some funny vintage image, and then I just write some nice things. And then there's a book club. And so we don't do any videos for the book club. We just have a backstage where we talk about it. I put the polls up to like garner interest to see if people are interested, but it's a very small group. So it's been consistent for a long time. And those two offerings have been, fun and I like doing them. It's not something that I'm really doing for the price. So it's more like I'm putting this out here because I like doing these things for people and they're doing subscription because they want to support me as an author going after the publishing. And so that's how we're sort of coexisting, throwing money this way, throwing presents that way, and being like, hey, it all comes out in the wash. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. I would say if you are looking at the different models for subscription-based writing platforms, I would look at Kickstarter, I would look at Ream, because those will have better bases for readers, I think.
Okay.
My co-host of the AWC SD Houston, HUSTON, has a YouTube channel with several videos about her Kickstarter experience, and she did a rock star job. So if you're curious about that, she has lots and lots of detail on it. I have not done one, but listening to her experience, like it's a lot of work. Patreon was less work than that to start, and I'm better at like regularly updating things than cramming, which is I think what Kickstarter really needs or requires. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've covered most of the questions, but let me know if there's some that you really liked that, because we had quite a few that we went over.
Yes. Let's see.
I'm going to very quickly open the door to let the dog out.
Okay. All right. And I'll like scan my notes here. The Yep. Distribution, bookselling.
So Andrew says he's on Instagram alone. The only platform. Yeah. Hi Milo. Yeah, he's here. I'm not gonna lift him up again because he's not really a lap dog. He's like, I'm a big boy. I don't like going on laps.
A squirmy worm. Yes.
Yeah.
We talked about staying motivated and inspired.
Oh yeah.
So how so there's technical answers to this, and then there's more like holistic answers. And I would say the most oft used technical solution for me is to task switch. So for whatever reason, when I switch tasks to something different and engage a different part of my brain, for example, if I finish with this interview and then I like clean up, my dad just visited for a few days. And so like I have to put the couch back together and move all the furniture around. And that's like physical and sort of logic based, different part of my brain. And then maybe I'll come back here and be like writing about keywords or writing about advice and turn it into a blog post or switching and cooking something that I'm going to use later, what have you. That for some reason gives me momentum, even though it's different tasks, so that I feel I'm making progress on different fronts. And then sometimes recording it helps. So like if I have my planner and I'll say, I did this today, and like if it fills up and I've got different colored pens saying I did this and this and this, I feel like, oh, I accomplished something today. Whereas if I don't record it, sometimes I feel like the day just passed and what did I do? And then I, get down um, about making progress that is
Yeah.
invisible. So yeah, so that's the technical thing. And then I also say just like allowing play and rest. So, if you go for a walk, it's it's is it productive time? Like I feel like letting go of the corporate overlord mindset of like, where's that
Yeah.
report and whatever, and thinking that you're engaging different parts of your brain and it's all part of the process. As Barrett likes to say, Barrett Laurie, it's all writing, right? And so sometimes playing is helping you recharge, and sometimes resting is helping, your brain filter through to the solution to the ending you didn't know. And all of that is being nice to yourself and giving yourself grace so that you don't get mad or perfectionist or, feel like giving up. And so that helps in a holistic way.
That's really, yeah, that's really good, because I was thinking to myself, when we started this conversation and we talked about, you had to make that that choice to not be so risk adverse when you sort of like stepped out of the 9 to 5 and went for the part-time job initially in the bakery, so that you wouldn't have that like all of your mind occupied by a job that usually wants you to work over the hours that you actually contracted
Mm,
to, and therefore it just stays in your mind the whole time. And
mm,
then even when you step out of that, it's difficult to step out of the mindset. I mean, it's a huge step to do that, to go, okay, I'm stepping out of the 9 to 5 and going to embrace a little bit more risk. But it's the mindset as well, isn't it? Do you feel, from what you're describing, you've learned to give yourself some grace doing that? But did it take a while? Because I don't know if it's just me, but I kind of feel guilty if I do stuff like that. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be
definitely.
productive, and yeah,
Yeah. So for me at this point, like 10 plus years in, I feel like I go in phases where I need to write regularly to get through a project, and then I sort of let it rest and can switch to something else or like a different part of the process. And and then there's like another month that adds on from nowhere just because other things are going on in life. Life happens, right? So I definitely still have periods where I'm like, did I make the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? Because um, some of the things that I envisioned as points of success or things that I was looking forward to have not happened. And I'm kind of like, well, I'm having to amend my ideas of the future, which is what happens anytime in life. And like learning that is so fun.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's that
But
whole thing of preconception, isn't it? We've got these
right.
preconceptions of how something is, and it's
Yeah.
not until you try things that you actually go, "Oh, this is totally different from the way I thought things were going to play out, and what this whole market is about, and like what the overall picture is."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely feel guilty if I don't write for a while.
So the thing is, like, a part of that is probably not guilt, but like an itch to create and write again, right? So part of yourself is probably like scratching at the door saying, hey, hey, we're trying to get out. We have words. We're building up in here. And there's like pressure, right? So maybe if you get into a place where you're like, okay, I have time. I'm going to make myself very comfortable. I'm going to get a cookie and a cup of tea, and we're going to sit down and like whatever comes, comes. You allow something in rather than saying, like I need 500 words today, because more pressure is not conducive, at least for me. Some people are like, I write to a deadline and that works. That does not work for me. So I like writing with a community that has like goals and tries to hit landmarks, goalposts,
Hmm.
whatever the
Yeah.
words you want to use, but not deadlines, because it's it's subjective, like when it's done. So it's really hard to say like I did the thing, except if you're you.
Yeah.
So
Um, Oh gosh, it's gone out of my head. I had this thought, and it's totally, totally gone. which is probably a sign to wrap
Is
up,
something
to let
scratching at the door? Was it another like horror novel that came into your head?
not a novel, not the dog either, because he's finally given up jumping on me.
Oh,
There's a thought, but it's sort of like flitted away.
mine do that too. Don't worry. I did have a thought that I was going to remember earlier, and that is like when you see a book that has a preview of the next book in the back, like keep
Ooh,
reading for a preview. Just imagine, just think how far ahead of the schedule they have to be
oh,
sure that's going to be the text for the next book at the printing of the first book and the formatting and like that just I couldn't do that. That's like
it's come back to me because you said
okay,
that.
excellent,
It was about
excellent.
the deadline. So,
Okay.
there's a booktuber, called Reading Movies, and he has, the niche of just, reviewing books that have come about as novelizations of films. So,
Oh.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. A book tie-in.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that a lot of the books that he talks about, the authors get such a tight turnaround. And I can't remember which book it was. It was a popular one, and the author was given 2 weeks to turn the movie into a book to novelize it. And I was like, well,
Wow.
that's
Is it like The Witcher? No, because The Witcher was a video game and a story
it's
before
it's
then.
it's a little bit more vintage. Maybe maybe it was the original Ghostbusters or something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, I was just like,
When you
wow.
think when you think about how long it takes to make the movie version of a book because you have to rearrange things and sort of stretch them out to fit not only a production schedule, but before that, like the format that you're going for. Because I remember being really interested in how Outlander was being um, adapted and how, okay, well, if it's a whole series for a book, then you have to see when you're going to chop each episode. How many episodes do you have? Like, what needs to happen in that arc in each episode? It's like, it's a mess. So I wonder why it's so easy for them to just hand it off to a writer from the movie side. That's
Yeah.
very interesting. I'll look up that channel afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, so Andrew is highlighting the which was
Right,
books
right.
first. But yeah, so the reason that I came across this channel is because I had looked at The Shape of Water and Pan's Labyrinth, both Guillermo del Toro's movies that were
Yeah.
novelized, and by Cornelia Funke, and I've forgotten the other author. But as I was reading these, I thought these are fantastic novels,
Mm.
and they do keep the essence of the film. But there's a lot that has to be written around because we're seeing it visually, and they have to think
Right.
about how to convey that in the words.
Fewer words.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so that got me thinking about the novelization, and I did a video on it, and they
Oh,
commented, and that's how I found out that that's what they focus on. That's their
wow.
passion. Yeah.
Wow.
But yes.
2 weeks. Jesus. That's when like you're getting room service in a hotel and not leaving. Like, oh geez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Margaret, thanks so much. And I know we've gone over our time because I said to you, "Oh, do you have an hour?" And you rushed over as well because you had something just previously, and then you had
Yeah.
the cat shenanigans. So yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Katya. This has been fabulous. I really
Thanks
appreciate being on
everyone
your
for
channel.
joining. Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Bye.